Hello, everybody. This is Mike Van Meter, and welcome to the Recovery is Possible podcast. This episode is sponsored by FHE Health, a substance abuse and mental health treatment center specializing in treatment for first responders' needs, including PTSD, anxiety, and substance use. So take the first steps to a better life today by visiting FHEHealth.com. We have a special guest, Patrick Fitzgibbons. He's joining us tonight, and he also does work with FHE Health. And Pat is a retired police professional himself, just like me, and he's got over 2 decades of experience in various capacities. He's an author, he's a coach, speaker, and educator. And after his successful law enforcement career, Pat wanted to continue to give back to the profession that was so good to him over the years. And that's exactly what I've been doing. And we really just want to help, people out there, because that's what we do in recovery, folks. And we want to give you as many tools, as much information, and the encouragement that you need to get better. I really appreciate Patrick coming on to the podcast tonight. And he's got his own podcast, and he's going to be telling you all about that. So we're going to get to know him. We're going to hear his story, and we're going to hear about the great work that he's doing. We're going to just discuss how we can take that information to go out and help one another. So with that, Pat, thanks for coming on the show.
Be here. Love what you're doing, brother. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, talk to the audience about how it is that we came together and what it is that you do.
Well, you and I came together by a mutual friend that happens to work with FHE. Thanks for the intro, Mike. As you mentioned in your introduction, I also work for FHE now in business development and marketing, and trying to get people the much needed services that they need, first responders, other people, mental health, addiction, or both. But my journey was one, it kind of took twists and turns. I retired from law enforcement in 2019. I spent all my career in Colorado and retired in 2019 as a police commander. I had about 23 years on the job. And I really, really feel sorry, Mike, for the brave men and women who serve now, because it's a different world, as you know. And your listeners probably know it's a different policing. But thank God there's still brave men and women who want to be police officers now. I don't think they're in the numbers like you and I have seen them in years past, but thank God people are getting into it. But I was a former patient at FHE, as you know, Mike. And, it wasn't too long ago. I was on the treatment. I was getting treatment down in Florida in Deerfield Beach, where FHE is. And my story really began in 2020, of December 2020. It was the holiday season, obviously. My son, who's in the military, he's in the Air Force, came home for the holidays. And, it was a great Christmas. And the day that really changed my life was December 27th, a couple days after Christmas. My stepdaughter and I, we had a routine when she came back. She was living in Chicago at the time. We would work out, get up every morning really early. Well, this particular morning, it was about 4:00 in the morning. I heard a scream, and I ran downstairs to the kitchen where I heard the scream coming from, and my son was laying on his back on the kitchen floor, gasping for air. And, he had his bedroom downstairs, and my stepdaughter said, he just came up the stairs and fell over. So I'm freaking out, obviously. It's my son. He was in and out of consciousness. I'm doing what I can to give him, to get him back, sternum rubs and all that stuff. Paramedics subsequently came, and they took him to the hospital. Now, before my wife and I, Mike, went to the hospital, I went downstairs and took a glance at his room where his bedroom was, and I noticed that he had vomited everywhere. So I'm thinking, okay, it's got to be some medical condition that, the military didn't catch, when he went into the military. So it's medical. He's in good hands. They're going to help him, So we get up to the hospital, and we're up there. My son is, he's cognizant. He's awake now in the ER room. I see him. what happened? He's like, I don't know, Dad. I came up the stairs, and my son was 20 at the time. I just fell over. That's the last I remember. And I said, well, they're going to help you. I know these ER docs up here. I had the benefit, Mike, of living and working in the same town, in just outside of Boulder, Colorado. So the hospital wasn't very far away. So, about that time, my stepdaughter texted me and said, hey, you need to call me. So I called her right away, and she said I was cleaning up, his room downstairs, and I found some suicide notes. So my son took a lot of pills, I think it was Advil, and drank a lot of booze and tried to kill himself. And one of the hardest things that I ever had to do, Mike, was to go back into that ER room where he was at and ask my son what had happened. We were both crying. I was devastated. Thank God he was still here, but I was devastated. And he said, yeah, Dad, I tried to kill myself. And, he had been going through some tough times, stuff that he was dealing with, and I didn't see it. So I blame myself. But I told him, I said, you're going to get the help you need. He asked me not to tell the military. And so I reluctantly said, I won't say anything to the military. Well, the military already knew where he was at because they were tracking him through his social security number. So I got a call from his chain of command, and they asked me what was going on. And I said, well, it's a health condition. And they said, well, with all due respect, sir, we know what's going on. And rest assured, we're not going to kick your son out. We're going to get him the help he needed. And they did. Mm. And my son now is thriving. He's doing very well, got the treatment he needed to get. But Mike, I started going downhill. I really started going downhill. As you know, you were in law enforcement a long time. We see a lot of death. We see a lot of trauma, human suffering. And I remember seeing my son on the floor, and all those images from every scene I ever went on started flooding back. And, as well as the military, and that was 20 some years ago, almost 30 years ago, but I was having those images too. And I didn't realize it at the time, Mike, but I started pulling back. I started, becoming more introverted. I started isolating myself. I started drinking. I was never a big drinker, but I started drinking a lot more to kind of ease the pain and kind of forget what had happened. Obviously, this affected my relationship with my wife. She was worried about me. She wanted me to get treatment. And like many first responders, I said, nah, I'll deal with it like I have for years. So I came down to Arizona in April of 2020, and my wife wanted me to go out of town, take some time. I got a lot of family down in Arizona. And when I was in Arizona, we talked, and she said she wanted to talk to me when I got back to Colorado. And long story short, I got back to Colorado, and she asked for a divorce. And it was a painful divorce. It was painful for both of us. But I got to a place in my life, Mike, where I was very depressed, very isolated. I was drinking every day. My physical health was in the toilet. I lost so much weight. I wasn't eating. My day consisted of Mike waking up at 10 a.m. or whatever, and waiting for the liquor store to open, and going and buying a 12-pack of beer, sucking that down, maybe get some Grubhub, and just, it was like Groundhog Day. Every day was like that, to a point where I was going to kill myself. I started having suicidal ideation. I started writing about it. I was staying with my younger brother at his house at the time in Denver. He had a big shed in the backyard, and I just had this ideation. I was like, I'm going to kill myself in that shed. And one night I was lying in bed, and I was drunk, and I had my Walther next to me, which is, a 9mm handgun. And I raised it up, and I was going to kill myself. And there was, we all maybe have heard of, the two angels on your shoulder. And I was literally having that happening to me, where I had one angel on one shoulder saying, you're a POS, and, you've lost everything. You lost your wife, and you're going through this and that, and this happened to your son. It's your fault. You should just kill yourself. And then the other angel was telling me, you got a lot to live for. You can get through this. And so I put my gun down, reached for the phone. My family, my brothers and sisters, knew something was going on with me at the time. But I, like every good first responder, I put on a mask and said, oh, everything's great. But I wasn't great. So this time I picked up the phone and reached out. My younger sister came over to the house. I told my sister, I said, I need some help. I'm going to kill myself. So we went to a hospital in Denver, and I checked myself in. And the reason I checked myself in, and and probably some of your listeners might, because I knew I could check myself out. All I had to do is just talk to the psychologist. And I remember getting to this hospital, and I don't blame the hospital. They're just not set up for first responders. And so I got to the hospital, was there for about 4 hours, told the psychologist, or psychiatrist, I'm fine, I don't want to kill myself. So it kind of pissed my sister off because she wanted me to stay there. I didn't want to stay. I remember through my network that there was a place down in Florida, but I couldn't remember what it was called. So I got back to my brother's house the next day. I started making phone calls, and that was hard. Being a first responder, I had to put my ego aside and ask for help. I'm so used to, you mentioned I have a podcast like you, Mike, and I'm used to like giving advice, and now here I am. I need to take my own advice, but I did it, and it was the best thing I ever did. So went down to Florida, FHE, part of the Shatterproof program for first responders. Got amazing treatment. Really was the foundation that helped me build on that. The program gives you the foundation, and it's amazing treatment. We could probably talk about it, what it consists of. But that really got me started on my journey, and I wanted to continue to give back to first responders more than I had been in the past. And now, God works in mysterious ways, and now I'm working for the program that I was once a patient, and it's an honor working for FHE and the Shatterproof program. So my job now is I do a lot of, business development, marketing, and trying to connect people who need the much needed services, namely first responders. And there's a ton of them, as you know. So I know that's my story in a nutshell, brother. It's amazing how life works.
Yeah, it really is. And we were talking before you came on the program, just so the listeners know that's your situation. Here you are working for the very place where you went through treatment. Yeah. And as we speak, as I'm doing this podcast, I am sitting in the treatment center, working as an intern, as I'm completing some requirements for licensure to become a therapist. I'm in the same facility that I was in, and it's an amazing thing. It really is. And congratulations to you, because I don't know.
Thank you, sir.
Now you were a paratrooper, correct? You were 82nd Airborne.
Yeah, I was jumping out of perfectly good airplanes.
Yeah. Now the reason, and that's phenomenal, and thank you for your service, and thank you for everything that you've done, not only in your law enforcement career, but your military career.
No,
and I'm going to throw something out at you, and I'm going to see if you agree with this, because those that listen to this podcast know my background. And I will tell you that no matter what I've done in my career, no matter how hard and difficult some of the things I've done in my career, and your career as well, the most difficult thing I ever did, and the best thing I've ever done in my life, was get sober. That hands down. Was the hardest thing that it happened. Because my story has a little different path than yours, in that it took me a long, long time to finally get into long-term sobriety. Yours seemed to happen a little bit quicker, but it was very, very difficult. But what's interesting about our stories is you and I, towards the end of our stories are very similar. But I loved how you talked about having the two voices, or the way that you put it was the two angels on your shoulders, because I've often told my story that it really was. You have one voice in one ear saying, look, this has to stop, and you've got to get better. And then you have the other voice saying, let's just keep going and let's do it. And there really is that battle. And I know, working in the treatment center here, I hear that a lot with a lot of different patients, that it's, in addiction, people that have never gone through addiction. And if you're listening to this podcast and you have a loved one that is going through this, it really is a battle. It's a real battle. Your loved one isn't drinking or drugging themselves to death because they dislike you, or they're angry at you, or they're a bad person. This has nothing to do with being a good or bad person. It is a disease, the disease of addiction. It's a very serious disease. And when you are under the control of this disease, it is a power that is something that is difficult to describe, almost impossible to describe, but it affects everyone, to include people like yourself that are very tough human beings, paratroopers in the U.S. Army that are very tough human beings. But man, when this thing has you, it's not letting go, and you're not winning that battle. Was that your experience as well?
Absolutely. I went down, and that was a great summation, Mike. I mean, I went down there. I was never a big drinker. I mean, I would drink socially, but I was heading down the path of addiction. Like I said, every day I was getting beer. I mean, I never really liked the hard stuff that much, but I was getting beer, and it's alcohol nonetheless. But I went down more for mental health issues. But I would attend, the wellness meetings now, or AA meetings. I would go there every night, because just to hear the stories and learn. But I had the same thing happen to me. I mean, it was a battle, and until I got settled into the program and really dived into the program. I still heard, the voices, you need to, leave here, get out of here, go back and resume, the state you were in. And it's like, you said it very well. I mean, it's a battle, and it continues to be a battle. I'm much more empathetic now to people. I was empathetic before, but much more now to people who are suffering from mental illness. And there's a ton of them out there, Mike, you know that.
Oh yeah.
Not just first responders, but a lot. Somebody's carrying something, and you know that, and your listeners probably do. Everybody's carrying something, a baggage, whatever you want to call it, scars, damage. And, I've become much more empathetic to people who are suffering now, because you're right. It's not that they hate, like a teenager, for example, with their parents. It's not that they hate their parents, but I hope they don't, but it's the addiction that has taken over. And now with all the stuff that is out there, all the drugs that are out there, you and I probably dealt with marijuana, maybe a little bit of cocaine when we were growing up, in high school. Now it's fentanyl and all this other crap that's out there. So it really is a shame. But thankfully, there's programs out there, that can help, namely first responders with addiction and mental health. And Shatterproof is an amazing program. We were talking before we started about, RRT and EMDR and, the brain stimulation that Shatterproof has down in their facility. It really is cutting edge stuff. And it changed my life, brother. It saved my life. I took the step, and I tell people a lot, you have to take that first step. But once you take that first step, it was liberating, Mike. And you asked me before, are you okay telling your story? If you would have asked me that question, Mike, a couple of years ago, I would have said, absolutely not. Now, I'm not afraid anymore. Because if I can help somebody, if there's a listener out there right now that can say, well, he did it, I can do it, then I've done my job. I'm happy. I remember when I was down in therapy, I was down in Shatterproof, a friend of mine who's still on the job, he was calling me and he said, hey, people are asking about you, because I made it publicly. I went on my show, Mike, before I entered treatment. I said, this is where I'm going to be. This is where, because, people would want to know, I'm not doing the show for a while. And I was very candid about it. And I said, I need to get some help. And so people knew where I was at, my good friends. And so one of my friends called me up and said, hey, people are asking about you. In the department I used to work with, do you mind if I tell them what you're doing? I said, absolutely not. Tell them, tell them. I'm not ashamed. I'm not afraid anymore. And once people can get over that fear, because I think a lot of people out there, and I'm making an assumption, but I know I was, they're so afraid of what people are going to think, that they're going to look weak. You're going to look weak, and people aren't going to, I don't look at it that way. Maybe I'm just naive, Mike. I look at it as a sign of strength, because if you don't take care of yourself, especially as a first responder, how are you going to take care of your family? How are you going to take care of the community? How are you going to be at your peak level you should be at? You can't do it. And I teach in the academy sometimes, and I tell these young officers, I said, you need to take care of yourself, your mental health. You and I, Mike, didn't have this when we were on the job.
None.
And you need, I think we're getting better, but you need to take care of yourself, mentally, physically.
Yeah, and I think that, and you are absolutely right. We are not even close to where we need to be right now, but we definitely are getting better. In fact, I was telling Patrick before he came on the show that I'm teaching in an academy, one of our local police academies next week. I was at an academy a couple weeks ago. I still teach at the FBI Academy. We talked about addiction at the FBI National Academy. So we are doing that, but it's not near enough. And I think that not just for first responders. Now, Patrick and I are both former first responders. But understand what we're talking about applies to everybody. I sit in this. In fact, as I sit in this treatment center right now, and I talk to the patients all day long. That's all I do. And I always get asked by every patient, well, what do I do? What do I tell people when I go back? And my daughter's got a wedding next week, and people are going to ask me, what am I going to say? What am I going to do? And they obsess over that. And that's we can get into that discussion and talk about strategies for early recovery, because usually the people that worry a lot about that are people that are in early recovery. And then I'm not disparaging that. That's a valid concern, and it's a discussion that needs to be had. But what I want to address is why that is a concern for everyone, and that predominantly has to do with the fact that this is such a stigmatized disease. Now, I want to be very clear about this. Addiction is a disease. It is not a moral issue. For example, we are in the middle of March. I live in Virginia, and everything's starting to bloom right now. And I want you to picture this. Imagine this conversation. If, let's say, things are blooming and I have a runny nose and I'm sneezing and I'm snotting and I'm just miserable because of all the flowers that were blooming. And I have really bad allergies, and that is, in fact, what happens about this time of year. So I'm bracing for that right now. But imagine, Patrick, if you came up to me and said, Mike, you know what your problem is? You know why you're sneezing like that? Because you don't go to church enough. Do you know why you're sneezing like that? Because you don't love your wife enough. You don't love your kids. If you were a better employee, that would be better. And I would look at you and I would say, Pat, what does that have to do with anything? Yeah. And of course, the answer to that is nothing. It has nothing to do with it. And now we can understand that. I mean, that's a clear example. But when it comes to drinking or drugging, and in my case, it was alcohol, and I think in your case, it was strictly alcohol as well. Imagine if you came to me and said, Mike, if you went to the gym more often, you wouldn't drink like that. Imagine if you loved your wife, you wouldn't drink like that, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm thinking, but Patrick, you don't understand. It has nothing to do with it. I do love my wife. I do think I'm a good employee. I do go to the gym. I do these different things, but yet I'm still drinking myself to death. Yeah. It's because one has nothing to do with the other. Absolutely. And the problem is, in our communities, we still put, even though people intellectually will tell you that they understand that addiction is a disease, I'm not so convinced that people truly believe that. But it is. If your loved one is drinking the way that we drank, it's because it has taken over, and there's no one that wants them to stop more than they do, but they just can't stop because of the physiology that has taken over. And we've covered that in other podcasts, and we can discuss that a little bit more here. But the fact is, there is no off switch because of the genetic miswiring within the body. The alcoholic has a different sense of euphoria that the non-alcoholic never experiences. And that has to be stopped, and there's programs for that, programs like FHE and other programs that are out there as well. Yeah, but do you agree with my assessment of that?
Oh, absolutely. That was well said, Mike. And it's like I got this, a little bit from my family when I was drinking. I was going down that path. Is, well, why don't you just stop drinking? Well, to your point, I was heading down that path where I was craving alcohol every day. And to your point, I think people think, well, there's an on and off switch, and you get a serious alcoholic or somebody who drinks all the time. The body needs that because it's an addiction. And there's ways to wean people off that through treatment, like you said. But you can't, I think it's naive to think that an alcoholic or somebody else with addiction issues can just shut it off. And you can't do that. You can't do that. That's what treatment is for. You can, but the addict is probably going to pay for it in some way, shape, or form physically. Yeah. So,
and by the way, if you're listening to us and you are drinking the way that we're describing, it's actually dangerous to just stop. You really do need to be medically walked down. You have to be careful with that. You should be medically walked down.
Yeah. Yeah. So people who, are out there and say, well, they should just quit. It just comes down to, Mike, and you probably know this, it just comes down to educating more. We have this amazing age we're living in with information is at our fingertips. Yeah, you need to vet the information, but just, do some research and say, okay, this is, like you said, it is an addiction. It is an addiction. So, okay, these are the things I'm going to look at online or wherever, and just research it a little bit more. But I agree with you. We still have that society where it's so stigmatized. I think we're getting better because there's more awareness, there's more knowledge out there and information. But you're exactly right. Where, the people out there are going to put people in a box or label them. Why doesn't he just quit or she quit? And it's not that easy. It's not that easy. I remember when I got out of treatment, a buddy of mine got on the phone with me and he was frantic. He was crying. And, he had been through the program a couple of times and he was on his way to go to an AA meeting, and he called me up and he was upset and he was crying, he was sobbing. I was like, what's wrong? And he said, well, I'm going to the AA meeting, but I'm passing all these liquor stores. I just want to stop and get some booze. And I said, yeah, don't do that, man. You can do it. Just stick with it. And it's an addiction. Like you said, it goes back to, it's an addiction.
It hijacks your brain.
Yeah, it hijacks your brain and it takes over. But the good thing is, Mike, you've been clean and sober for several years now. There is help. Mm-hmm. You can get help, like FHE. There are resources out there.
Mm-hmm. And what people need to understand too, and this is something unique to where you went to treatment, is the work on the neural pathways and the functioning of the brain. And excellent. What we have to understand is that when you are drinking and drugging the way that we're describing, the neural pathways in your brain actually change. The wiring of your brain changes. Now, the brain, fortunately, is very malleable and can be reshaped. Okay, and there's things that you can do to help that, and we can talk about health, we can talk about diet, we can talk about exercise. Certainly, you have to be abstinent to allow your brain to repair the damage. But a lot of those neural pathways and those really just sort of the pathways that where you're getting those pleasure senses from, you have to be careful with that because you never want to pick up a drink or a drug again because that will just re-trigger the whole process over again. Now, but what I really am excited about is a lot of the work that was done, where you went to treatment. A lot of people need to, let me just say this before I kick it over to you and you can describe what is being done down in Florida at FHE Health. But A lot of people think that AA, and you mentioned AA, and that's why I'm going to talk about this right now. They think that 12-step programs get you to stop drinking. That's actually incorrect. 12-step programs don't get you to stop drinking. And I want you to listen closely to this, folks. 12-step programs prevent you from starting drinking, and that's a big difference. Treatment and detox get you stopped drinking. Then the 12-step programs help create a lifestyle and a way of dealing with life and dealing with life's problems that keep you from starting drinking, because it's that first drink that kills you. There's an old adage in AA that it's not the 100th drink that kills you, it's the first one, because that's what starts that whole process over
Absolutely.
again. Right?
Absolutely.
And so that's what those programs are all about. Now, that's because we're dealing with life, we're dealing with resentments, we're dealing with just the difficulties of life. That's what causes people to go back out and drink, is being angry, being upset, having a tragedy in their life. But now it gets easier over a period of time. That's the good news in recovery, is that as our bodies and our brains heal and we become better equipped spiritually and dealing programs to deal with those problems, it does get easier. But that damage is still done in the brain, and there's those neural pathways. And so I never went through a program where that was actively worked on, but you did. And if you could just describe to the listeners a bit about what you went through and what that was all about.
Absolutely. I mean, they're a big component of the Shatterproof program that's part of FHE was the neurostimulation. A lot of programs out there, Mike, and maybe your listeners know, they have neurofeedback. Well, the difference with FHE is they have actual neurostimulation. And neurostimulation is basically, you talk about neurons. It's basically rewiring, for lack of a better word. And I'm sorry, I'm not a doctor, but basically they map your brain. When I got down to Shatterproof, part of the intake process is they map my brain. And the purpose of mapping, the brain or my brain or patient's brain is to see what areas need help, i.e. depression, PTSD, suicidal ideation, lack of sleep, anxiety, you name it. They can tell by looking at the brain what areas they need to focus on. So they map my brain when I get down there, and I'm thinking, I've never heard of this stuff before. What the heck is this? But there's obviously science behind it, and we know so much. We know very little about the brain, but we're getting better with it. And these people down at FHE are amazing. So they map my brain, and they get a reading, they get a baseline where I'm at, and then the next step is to start the neurostimulation. Now it is, they put like a thing on your head, not a helmet, but like it's hooked up to, little stimulants, so they're giving you, and I was freaking out, Mike, when I got there, because I was like, this is electroshock therapy. It's not electroshock therapy.
Yeah.
But they stimulate your brain, little milliamps in areas, and you have like a fishnet thing on your head, and different areas that they want to focus on. Now, the question that I always get is, well, how long does it take? Well, on average, it takes about 4 or 5 sessions for people to start, or patients to start seeing a difference. In my case, like I said before we went on the air, was about 5 sessions. And then I could start feeling the difference. And Mike, it was like night and day. Now, that was coupled with, like you said, giving the brain time to heal, not drinking, doing yoga, doing breath work, doing, acupuncture, which all of those FHE offers. So it was neurostimulation was a big part of my treatment. But it was all the other things too, coupled with neurostimulation, that really was a game changer for me. And I did about 18 sessions. Now, you mentioned, and I'm glad you mentioned, like, neurostimulation works. It's it'll last a long time, in some cases forever, but it depends on the patient. You mentioned somebody going through a program, say they go through Shatterproof and they do the neurostimulation and they get back to, their home or house and they start drinking again. And you're exactly right. That's going to reverse what happened with the neurostimulation. Now you're back in the old habits again. So the brain is going to go back to that, habit before. But neurostimulation, like I said, brother, it was a game changer for me. And Shatterproof and FHE are the only ones, I believe, in the country that offer that right now, is the neurostimulation. A lot of places offer neurofeedback, which is good, but FHE offers the neurostimulation, which, in my opinion, is a game changer.
Yeah, that's it's amazing. It's the only program in the country, or one of a few that does it.
Yeah, one of a few. I mean, I know a lot about a lot of programs like you do, and the big push now, Mike, is a lot of programs out there are starting to realize that first responders need help. I think 39% of first responders out there, when I'm talking first responders, I'm just talking about cops, as you know, but for the listener, I'm talking about fire, EMS, paramedics, all fall under that first responder umbrella. 39% of the people out there, first responders, are suffering either from mental health, addiction, or both. That's 39%. That's who we know about. My guess is that the number is probably higher.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's a lot higher than that.
Yeah, it's a lot higher than that. So it's like the dark figure of crime, brother. I mean, we only know about crime of what's reported. Okay, what's unreported? So that number's probably a lot more. But
and by the way, depending on the agency that you're talking about, like I was a Washington D.C. police officer in the mid '90s, and I would say it was probably most of the department. Forget about 39%. It was probably it was the Wild West. It was we had a police related shooting per week, so it was
probably much higher.
Yeah,
but there's a lot of programs out there, and I'm not putting them down or anything. And they're probably good programs, but a lot of programs now are starting to offer more in terms of mental health treatment and addiction treatment for first responders. But FHE is the number one program out there. I mean, when I was going through, when I was starting to research treatment for me, Mike, I have a lot of friends, as you do, big network, and I was talking to good friends in Phoenix, and a good friend of mine, who has many connections and in the treatment sphere. He was a former first responder down here in Phoenix. He said, Pat, we can get you down in Arizona, but the place you need to be is the number one place in the country, and that's FHE and the Shatterproof program for first responders. And within 48 hours, I don't think I said this when I told my story, within 48 hours, Mike, I was down in Shatterproof. And that's the thing where I talk to a lot of cops, and that's the thing that a lot of first responders, again, I'm not speaking for all of them, but the ones I talk to, is they'll reach out, the ones that do, and they'll have to wait forever. For a callback, or we got to get you into this, or we're looking at this facility. Shatterproof, and not in every case maybe, but in a lot of cases, they're going to get you down there quickly. And it was because they want to get you immersed in the program immediately. And the good thing about Shatterproof is, again, so much of first responders is based on trust. They're not going to open up, as you know, Mike, to anybody. 80%, 80% of the staff down in FHE in the Shatterproof program are former first responders. And in a lot of cases, they're former patients. So I remember getting in there, and my first group, Mike, I get in there, there's like 20 people in there, men, women. They're all first responders. And, I was apprehensive. Obviously, I was nervous. I was scared. I was fearful until one of the counselors in there, started telling his story, which, in my opinion, brings a lot of credibility. Former military, did this, that, and he's still in recovery, and he's still doing treatment. And then I was like, oh, not only am I among first responders, my brothers and sisters, but then I learned shortly after that the staff, most of the staff are former patients, and now they're working for Shatterproof, which is amazing. And I don't think there's a lot of programs out there that can say that. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm making an assumption, but that to me was okay. Now I trust, because they get it, Mike. You and I can tell war stories all day, and you get it. Even though we've never met in person, you get it, Mike. You were a first responder. You know how it is. And that's
there has to be a place for first responders. Yeah. There really has to be, because I know that was one of the reasons why I got into the work that I got into, because I know when I went into treatment, there was no one on the staff with my background. There were no patients that had my background. And let's face it, folks, when you end up in a treatment facility, not everybody likes the police, particularly these days.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's always been in the case. And it's very, very difficult, because things that we see every day, let me put it in perspective. A police officer or a first responder sees every day things that, for most people, if they saw it once or twice in their lifetime, would be traumatized. They'd be in therapy for the rest of their life over what they witnessed. When you're in law enforcement, that's just a normal work day. Yeah. And in order to talk about those things, it's difficult when you're working with counselors that have never experienced what you experienced. They have no idea what you're going through. And there's just something soothing. There's something that, a way that you can sort of just put your guard down, because police officers in particular, there's really a guard that's up. You don't trust anyone for any reason. And you have to be in a place where you can feel open to talk to others about the experiences that you've had, the good, the bad, the ugly. And it has to be a safe space where you know that the information that you're sharing is not going to go anywhere else. And there just are not a lot of facilities that do that. There are others. There are more are opening up around the country, but not many. And we certainly have to have more because it is just a tragedy what we're going through. And I'll tell you, by the way, I know we're talking about first responders here, but do understand that, Patrick is talking about FHE Health. FHE Health is not just for first responders, though. There is a shatterproof program, but if anybody out there is listening, you're thinking about, well, this doesn't apply to me, I'm not a first responder. No, the public can go to FHE Health. There are all kinds of programs that are there. Correct? Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Patrick.
No, you're absolutely right, Mike. So you have FHE, which is, think of it, umbrella. Now, under FHE, you have all these different programs. Empower Women is a program designed specifically for women. You have various programs, like 5 programs. FHE is just one of those programs that falls under the FHE umbrella. They have a sunlight program, and anybody who is interested in that, can contact me, contact you, Mike. And go to the FHE website. You just Google FHE. And you'll see it come up. And to your point, you're exactly right. It's not just for first responders. First responder program, the Shatterproof program, is a component that falls under the FHE umbrella. And they're helping all kinds of people, all kinds of people. The residential side is people from all walks of life, but FHE is very good at what they do. But you made a good point. I'm glad you said that, Mike. It's not just for first responders, even though you and I have first responder backgrounds. I'm working specifically with first responders. It's not just for first responders. They have other programs for people who need help, the civilian population, which is awesome because so many people out there need help. And now the one thing about the Shatterproof program is they have their own little area because they want to try to keep the first responders, together in an area. Because like you said, Mike, and you made a really good point. Not everybody likes the cops. So when you're around other first responders and fire and EMS, that's when, some of the biggest breakthroughs, Mike, that I had and talking with other patients when I was there in the Shatterproof program. Yeah, you have breakthroughs in counseling and things like that and other modalities that they're working with patients on. But just sitting in the courtyard and having discussions, open and honest discussions with other first responders that were going through difficult times, that is huge, man. Some of the, walls come down. Okay, he's a brother, he's a sister, I can tell him this. And it truly, like every show I go on, Mike, and everybody I talk to, and I'm not BSing, Shatterproof saved my life. I said that before. I took the first step, but Shatterproof gave me that foundation. And I tell people this all the time. Shatterproof is not going to cure everything. You still have to do the work. So when, I still went through IOP when I got back. I still am in counseling. I tell people Shatterproof is amazing. FHE is amazing, but you still have to do the work. We were talking about AA. You can't go to one AA meeting and think everything's going to be great. You have to constantly go. You have to, when you're having those cravings, like the example I gave, that guy that I was talking to, a friend of mine, he went to the AA meeting, thank God. And I said, okay, do me a favor, brother. Take a picture and let me know you were there. And he did. It's a constant battle. It doesn't stop when you leave treatment.
It just gives you the tools. Because the thing is I'm about a decade in to recovery, and I do almost as much work on my recovery every single day now as I did in that first year. It actually just becomes a way of life. But, treatment, whether you go to FHE or you go to any other treatment facility, they're going to give you the basic tools. It's kind of like boot camp. It's kind of like treatment is like recovery boot camp. Boot camp, you go in, you're introduced to the organization, the Army, Navy, whatever you go into, and it gives you those basic skills. But then you go off into advanced training and develop other skills. And that's kind of what recovery is like.
Absolutely.
But you've got to do it, and you've got to do the work. The 12-step program in particular is a program that develops your spiritual life, because having a purpose greater than yourself is really kind of the secret sauce to long-term recovery. And that is work, developing, and whatever that means to you. I'm not even saying religion. I'm talking about spirituality and just learning that there's a greater purpose. It's not uncommon. Look at what Patrick and I are doing right now, doing this podcast and trying to help others. That's very typical in recovery, because what happens is it will manifest itself in different ways in different people, but you kind of take on a new mission And that's a lot of what addiction was all about. I you know what, and maybe this is something to discuss here. I know for me, I recovery, and I just thought of this just now, Patrick. I'm a very driven person, and it sounds like you are too. And what happened was I became very, very driven. And then at some point, it was like I stopped developing and stopped pushing for the next step, pushing for the next thing that I wanted to do to accomplish. And it for me, it hit middle age. And then it was kind of like I was rudderless after a while. I had achieved all the goals, all the professional goals I wanted. And then I got to where I wanted to be and then became disillusioned with that. You know, I worked really hard to get to this position, to get into this organization. And you get there and then you realize it's not all that you thought it was going to be, and you're not satisfied with it, and then you become disillusioned with it, and then you're like, but now you're middle-aged and you can't start over, you got a family, you got all these, and then that was kind of where I started going off track and then using alcohol to sort of numb that away. But unfortunately I have that genetic predisposition, and then the disease took off, and then, you know, and here we are today, to where I'm one of the grateful. I'm grateful that I'm one of the lucky ones that got into recovery. But what happens in recovery is we kind of reconnect with what, you know, that being driven for the next thing, except for it being the career. Now I'm driven to help other people, and I've gotten that new mission, so to speak. Is that what happened with you?
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up, Mike. You know, when I retired from law enforcement, 23 years, I was at the height of my career. I had risen to the ranks. I worked hard. I retired as a commander. When I left law enforcement in 2019, I thought that it was just a chapter and I was closing. But I didn't realize, you mentioned being driven, that how much the job drove me and how much I was driven by the job. And I lost my identity. You know, I can say that now. I lost my identity because, and you probably know, and other first responders that might be listening to this, it's such a big part of your life. So when I left in 2019, you know, my ex-wife and I traveled and did all kinds of other stuff, and it was fun. But there was something deep inside me that I wasn't driven. Sure, I had my show and things like that, but I'm glad you brought that up, because this came up in my therapy, and it really, you know, started digging deeper, and I lost my drive. I lost my meaning, whatever it is, what I was doing in life, because so much of what I was doing was tied up into a law enforcement career. And when I left that, there was a huge void, whether I, you know, liked it or not. And then I hit rock bottom. But to your point, when I started getting better and I started my recovery, I started having more purpose, and my mission changed. Okay, my law enforcement career is over. I had my time. Now my new mission, like yours is to help people that are suffering out there, and use my example and your example for hope. Now, hope, you can't just survive and get recovery based on hope. There has to be action behind it. So that's why, you know, my mission now, Mike, and for your listeners, is to help connect people to the services they need to get help, recover, continue their recovery, and lead normal, or whatever normal is today, Mike, lead a happy life. And that's my new mission. And by going on shows and doing my podcast and coming on your great show, hopefully we can reach people out there, because there's a lot of resources out there. FHE, again, another huge resource for not only civilians, but for first responders. But that's my mission now, brother. I mean, it is so surreal. We were talking about this before we started. It's so interesting how life works out. And the one thing that I started to do more in recovery, and I credit this to the neurostimulation, among other things, but the neurostim was huge, was my mindset. You know, realizing that the stuff I used to worry about, either I made it bigger in my head than it really was, or if it came to fruition, it wasn't as big as I thought it was going to be. I'm not saying I live in a bubble and rainbows and unicorns all the time. Life happens. But now I don't react the same way I did in the past, where I would get extremely anxious, you know, nervous, depressed. And I'm still a work in progress. You know, I still do my, you know, counseling and things like that. But I love how you said that, you know, and used you as an example, because I'm definitely on a new mission now. And my mission is to help first responders, because there's so many of them out there that are suffering in silence, and they don't need to suffer in silence. And trust me, I know for the listener out there, it's fear. A big part of it is fear. You're going to be judged. People are going to look at you. You know, it's like you know, I know it's overused, but I'll use it. It's like the oxygen mask on an airplane, Mike. You know, your listeners have probably heard this a million times. So who do you put the oxygen mask on first? You put it on you first. You got to take care of yourself before you can take care of others. And that's a big part of treatment, becoming good again, becoming yourself again, and realizing that it's not a quick fix, that you have to put in the work. And again, you put in the work, I put in the work, and life will get better.
It can't not get better. Yeah.
Yeah, it cannot. One of the best quotes I ever heard, Mike, was a couple years back. And I don't know if you know who Gary Vaynerchuk is, a big social media guy and has a marketing agency. And I remember seeing it, I think it was a TED Talk or a YouTube video, and he comes out on the stage, you got all kinds of people in the audience, and he has this slide up there. And it says 400 trillion to 1. And people are looking at him and they're like, what's this guy talking about? And he says, anybody know what that means? 400 trillion to 1. That is the statistical probability of you being born as a human. And when I first saw that is really, I mean, you can Google it, you can research it. That is the statistical probability. Now, the point in all that is you have this one life. That's all you have. If you're suffering, please reach out. Ask for help. Take that first step. I know it's difficult. I've been there. Mike's been there. But you can do it. But you got to have the right people around you. And I tell people this all the time, Mike. You got to surround yourself with people that are going to lift you up, not bring you down, and you surround yourself with people who are going to push you and drive you and support you, in your treatment. Those are the people that you want around you. I'm blessed, Mike. I have people within my family, good friends that push me. And we all need push, especially when I have bad days. You've been through hell and back. You can do this. Yeah, you're right. I can.
And what's funny too, what's funny about what you were saying, and I know you do a lot of teaching. I do a lot of teaching, do a lot of public speaking. And I always ask this question. In fact, it's usually one of the first things that I ask the group is, how many of you in here know someone, or you are someone, or you work with someone that suffers from an addiction issue?
Yeah.
And nearly everyone raises their hand.
Absolutely.
And I had, in fact, I even had a patient today ask me, he said, I'm so afraid that people are going to judge me, and that they might say, I'm going to go out and my buddies are going to pick on me, and I'll be the brunt of every joke. Mm-hmm. And I said, first of all, let's just start with, if you have any friends that come up to you and bully you because you're working on getting well due to they're not. First of all, you need to get rid of them. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
But I will tell you this, and I said, in nearly a decade of recovery, I've never experienced what you're talking about. Never. Yeah. In fact, quite the opposite. I'm pretty open, like you. I'm very open about my recovery, and I tell people about it. And you know what I always get, Patrick? I get, oh my God, congratulations, good for you. And I will always, and they will always follow it up with a story of someone in their life that they wish would get well the way that I did. Mm-hmm. And they're like, gosh, I really, could you talk to so-and-so for me? Because we've tried to get them well for so long. Can you help them? Or, I've had people come up and tell me that they were suffering from an addiction. And I've gone through, in my law enforcement career, I've had to go through background reinvestigations. And I've even had the investigators that were doing the background reinvestigation stop and ask me what was it that I did, what worked for me, because they knew somebody that needed to get well, or people that they've investigating never got well, and then consequently it affected their jobs. And so it was almost like they were more amazed that I had years of sobriety, and they wanted, well, how did you do it? Like, why is this working for you and not other people? So if you're listening right now, I'm telling you, if you get into long-term recovery, it's a great thing. And nearly everybody I know recognizes that. The only people that don't recognize it as being a good thing is us, for some reason. Yeah. I've never figured out why that is. But we're the only ones that don't get it.
Yeah, and to piggyback on what you said, Mike, excellent what you said. There were people in the first responder program down at Shatterproof and FHE that this was their second or third time. Mm-hmm. Nobody judged them.
No.
Nobody judged them.
Everybody, in fact, welcomed them back and said they're happy they're there.
Yeah, exactly. So for those of you who are listening and you're thinking, well, I've been to recovery, I've been through it, I don't want to go through that again. Sometimes it's not a one and done thing. Sometimes you have to go back to treatment, and there's no shame in that. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad you said that, Mike. If you have friends that are belittling you or giving you a hard time, they don't need to be in your circle. My circle has shrunk now, where people that I thought were my friends really weren't my friends. So I got a lot of friends, but I want people, like I said before, Mike, that are going to support me, and I support them and push me up, not bring me down. And a lot of times when people do that, you know this, Mike, maybe your listeners do, a lot of times when people resort to belittling or chastising or whatever adjective we want to use, it's because they're of their insecurities. Or maybe they tried it and it didn't work for them, so it's not going to work for Mike. I tried it. And I know it sounds curt, I know it sounds mean, but you don't need those people in your life.
No.
You need to surround yourself with the right people. And through your life, especially through your treatment, those people are going to come and go, and you might have a different, group of people in your life now than you did 10 years ago. You might have different people in your life a year from now, but always try to surround yourself with people who are lifting you up and try to push you to that higher level. Jim Rohn said, you're the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with. For the listener out there, who are you surrounding yourself with? Are you trying to get sober right now? Or are you surrounding yourself with your friends who drink all the time?
That's a great point. I've never heard that before. You're the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with. I like that.
It really, you remember, you have kids, Mike, and I have kids. And so you remember telling your kids, I used to tell Mike, don't hang out with those kids. They're bad kids. You get into trouble all the time. Why is that? Because you are who you associate with. You become that. You start becoming who you're around. And so if you want to start on the path of treatment, first of all, is make that call to FHE. Next is, okay, who am I surrounding myself with? Am I surrounding myself with the people who are just doing the stuff I'm doing? Well, how do you expect to grow? How do you expect to get better? And those are hard decisions, Mike. You know that. Mm-hmm. These are friends. But sometimes your friends, they're looking out for themselves. You got to look after yourself, and sometimes your, quote, friends don't have what's best for you in mind. So you need to do what's best for you. I tell people all the time, and some people might think it's mean, look, nobody's going to come in and save you. Nobody's going to come in and swoop you up. You might have people that you love in your life. I hope you do. They're good friends that support you, but it's up to you to save yourself. You have to do it. Yeah,
at the end of the day, the recovery comes with you taking that first step and doing the work. It really is.
Exactly. And when I immersed myself in the program, I did from the very beginning of Shatterproof and FHE, it was life-changing. And I saw some patients that were just doing their time, punching a clock so they could go back because their union or whoever wanted them to come down. Then 99% of the patients there were not like that. But there's always a percentage that is, a small percentage in Shatterproof. They're just biding their time. But the overwhelming majority of patients down there, when I was down there, immerse themselves in the program. And you know what? They're thriving today, Mike. They might have bad days like I do sometimes. I am still in contact with about 15 people, men and women, that were in the program when I was in, and we're on a big text chain. Every day we're pumping each other up. If one is doing not so good, the others chime in. We get on a phone call. We pump each other up. You want to surround yourself with those people. You want to surround yourself with those people. And if you don't have those people in your life, I'm sorry, get rid of them. They're not doing you any favors.
Yeah.
They're not helping you.
We get sick on our own and we get well in the fellowship. We get well as a group. We definitely do.
Absolutely.
Well, Patrick, I've really enjoyed the conversation. And is there any, you can take us out, any last bit of advice or last word for everybody before we go?
No, it's been an honor, Mike. I do. And like we've been talking about this last hour, a little over an hour, is there is help out there. You are not alone. You are never alone in your struggles. You always can take that first step. And if you're suffering out there, like Mike mentioned, call FHE. If you're a first responder, get in touch with me, Mike, or call FHE directly and reach out and stick with it and be strong, because you have a lot of support out there. More than you know. That's another thing. We get a lot of press, bad stuff going on in law enforcement, the press. I still believe, Mike, that the overwhelming majority of people out there in America support law enforcement.
Oh, they do.
Maybe I'm just naive. I wish they were more vocal, but you are cherished and loved. I know it might not seem like it, but people care about you. So take that first step if you are struggling and you need help.
Absolutely. And oh, by the way, you actually have your own podcast, and it's called Criminal Justice Evolution, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
It's been going on. Thank you for mentioning it, Mike. I've had that show for about 6.5 years, almost 7 years now, and I started it when I was still working on the job. And I love the show. It's therapy for me, even before I got into therapy, because I have great guests on the show, people like you that come on and they talk about mental health issues and problems and recovery and resiliency and leadership. Now, I do talk about criminal justice issues, use of force, and things like that, some hot topics, but I have pivoted. We mentioned pivoted and new mission. So what I like to do now with my show is have great guests like you on the show. Hopefully you come on my show.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Buy some candy or something. You can come on my show.
That's right.
I like talking now about mental health. And I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist, but mental health and how we as a first responder community struggle with this, leadership, resiliency, all those things. And it's been going strong, Mike. I got about 470 episodes now, and I've had it for a while. I've had best-selling authors on the show, Navy SEALs on the show, all these people. But when I first started the show really quick, I didn't want to just sit around and tell war stories all the time. I wanted to be inspirational and motivational, and that's what the show is. So you can find me at CJEvolution.com.
Yeah, so. CJEvolution.com, and that is Patrick Fitzgibbons. And thank you so much for coming on the show. Really enjoy it. This has been a fascinating discussion. And folks, once again, this episode has been sponsored by FHE Health. And according to SAMHSA, first responders are 30% more likely to develop behavioral health conditions like PTSD. FHE Health specializes in getting first responders better and cleared for duty. So find out more at FHEhealth.com. And so again, guys, like I always like to say, I don't actually promote any particular recovery programs that are out there. I know we talk about AA, and on other podcasts, I've talked about other programs as well. I'm not advocating, and I don't represent any of those programs. I'm just telling you what's out there, educate you on what they're all about. Get help. Get help for yourself. Pick one of these programs and work with them. Find somebody that has the tools, the information that you need to get well, because it is possible. There's a reason why I named this podcast Recovery is Possible, because it is possible. Patrick and I are examples of that. And so with that, folks, you guys take care of yourselves. You can contact us at VanMeterWellnessSolutions.com. That's VanMeterWellnessSolutions.com. Check out our Facebook page. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. And even on Rumble, you can check us out there. But we'd love to hear from you guys. Take care of yourselves, folks. Keep your head up. Things will get better. You can get well. And we'll be talking to you all soon. Bye-bye.